Hey friends! Why can't I be serious?
I don't know, I want to scream.
Hey friends!
I'm Grace Ann.
And I'm Andrea.
And we are G&A for today.
And we are two best friends living a faith-based lifestyle and
Documenting it.
if you haven't already, make sure you follow us on social media. We have an Instagram and a Twitter at G&A for today, and there you can just keep up to date on when we'll be posting and things that are going on in our lives.
Yeah, we both have personal social media as well. Mine will be on the screen here, and then Andrea's will be on the screen there, and they will be in the description below.
Make sure you check out last week's video. We talked about what it's like being long-distance friends and how to maintain those friendships even though you have such a distance barrier. The link for that video will be in the description and in the information box above.
So this week we're going to be talking about what it is like to be called to the ministry, and we're going to speak a little bit about our personal callings and talk about the difference between professional callings and personal callings, etc.
We wanted to put a disclaimer across this whole video because we do believe that all Christians are called. There is a universal calling for all Christians to spread the gospel and to live out the Great Commission, but this video specifically is talking about what the calling to professional ministry is like and having a ministry position as your job and as your profession.
So first we wanted to explain our personal callings and what they are specifically, and then we'll dive into the differences in callings, and then we will talk about our stories and stuff like that. So I have a professional calling on my life. My professional calling is to be a youth minister and to disciple young people and teach them how to be further disciples of the gospel. And I have a secondary focus, I guess, within my calling that is for the global church. I feel that my calling youth ministry-wise is a very local church purpose, and my global church calling is to integrate disabled persons into a church, such as like special needs children with cerebral palsy and autism, and deaf children and blind children and stuff like that, because I don't feel like they have enough representation in the global church.
The specific calling I have on my life is music ministry, and for some that means different things. For some that might mean to go across the world and teach people songs and things like that, but for me that's just in a church setting to be a music minister one day, and that's what I'm studying in school. We wanted to talk about the different ways you can be called into ministry, and sometimes you can experience only one and that's how you have been called, but sometimes you can experience two, sometimes you can experience all three. But these are some points that we've studied that we feel like will be better for you to understand how you can specifically be called in the practical world.
Yeah, so the first one is a supernatural calling. Now this one I feel like is the most complex of all three. So the supernatural is all about the calling between you and God. Very one-directional, not three-dimensional, not earthly, but very heavenly, very spiritually. And it can be audible, it can be like personable, it can be through prayer, through dreams and stuff like that, but it will be experienced only between you and God. It will not be experienced in a third person, and it won't be experienced outwardly. It will only be experienced upward.
And another way that you can be called is through God speaking through others to you. Someone might come up to you and say, the Lord has told me to tell you this, and that sometimes people are just making that up, and you should be able to differentiate that, but sometimes God really does give people a word that He wants to be spread to you, and that's a way that God can call you into the ministry is through other people.
So the third one is the practical calling, which is basically you have a very strong feeling on your heart. You essentially just know that this is what you are meant to be doing, that this is what God has called you to do, and you have either always had a sense of it, or as you have been praying and seeking the Lord, you have recognized this and come to terms with it, and it's something that is set in stone.
And we wanted to say that no call is better than another. God doesn't love the people that he calls supernaturally more than the people that he calls practically. It's just the different ways. No one is better than the other. It doesn't mean that you're more called to ministry if you got one and not the other.
Yeah. So we wanted to give you guys our specific calling stories, so to speak. So I'm going to speak about mine first, and then Andrea will speak about hers. Mine's a little long, so bear with me. So I actually experienced every form of calling that we just mentioned. So I'm going to start with my very first one, which was my practical calling. So I was called practically when I was about 9 or 10 years old. It was right after my grandfather passed away. And it was something that I feel like I had always known. Growing up, my grandfather was a minister of the gospel. He was the chaplain of the National Guard for about 30-some years and a pastor for 40-some. And I grew up under that sort of umbrella, godly, ministerial, influence. So I kind of always knew that I would either be teaching or teaching the gospel. There was no in between for me. I didn't really ever feel like I had any other options. Didn't feel like I ever had any other talents, so to speak. It was either I was going into teaching music or teaching the gospel. That was it for me. I never thought twice about anything else. But growing up without my grandfather, he passed away when I was 9. So growing up kind of without his influence for a while, I really suppressed that practical calling and was like, that's not a thing. I don't want to do that. I'm not comfortable with that. My grandfather isn't here to teach me all the ways and walk me through it, so I'm going to ignore that. So I did that and suppressed that until I was about 18 or so, around there. And then when I was a senior in high school, I experienced my supernatural calling. So I was praying really, really hard, it was probably a month before graduation. And I had gotten into every school that I had applied to, and I could not decide where I wanted to go. I had set my mind that I was going to go to the University of Mississippi, go Rebels. But in my heart, I knew that wasn't the right choice. And we were just receiving a new youth minister at our church who is now my mentor, and I knew that there was some type of connection that there was a really deep connection between he and I. And it was very much supernaturally. It was not I didn't know him. I had no idea who he was. I had just met him, but I knew that he was going to have a big impact in my life and in my future. And I knew this because I had prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed. And I was asleep one night and literally had a dream that myself and my mentor were working this church event. And I was a labeled youth minister and he was a labeled pastor. And this was crazy to me. And when I woke up that next morning, I called my pastor and was like, what is this? This is scary. And then I called the University of Mississippi and was like, I'm canceling my housing. I'm not going to school here. And I took the year off of school. But I once again suppressed this calling. And this just goes to show that if God has placed a professional calling in your life, you will not be successful unless you do what God tells you to do. Because I decided that it wasn't a youth ministry calling, that it was a music ministry calling. So my grandmother was a very musical person. She was a music teacher and a music minister for many, many years. And I grew up, she was my best friend growing up. I told her everything. And when she started getting sick, I was like, oh, this is it. This is my calling. This is what I'm supposed to do. I'm going to take on her role. I'm going to take on music ministry because it was all that I thought I could do at that point. I didn't think that I had any other calling on my life. I didn't think that I would be a good minister unless I was doing something with music. So then I applied to University of North Carolina, Greensboro. I went there and studied music and ended up failing out of school because circumstances were out of my control. My grandmother was very sick and it wasn't in God's plan and I was not being successful. Even though I was trying as hard as I could, I was studying literally all the time. Every single time I was not taking care of my grandmother or dealing with my own work, I was doing homework. And I was super stressed out at this point, had probably the worst year of my life. I had 6 family members die within 2 months of each other. I failed out of school. one thing after another. I had the worst year of my life. And then I went to a camp called Camp Castle here in North Carolina. There was a minister of the gospel. He was speaking. His name was Mike Satterfield. He is an amazing minister. If you've ever heard of him, look him up because his preachings are amazing. And as I was there, I was dealing with my grandmother, who was very, very sick at the time. And we had just put her in hospice care, and we knew that she was probably not going to live much longer. And I was struggling. I had just dropped out of school and didn't know how I was going to get back in school. I was really worried about my grandmother because she was very, very sick. She didn't remember anything. She couldn't get out of bed. Full-time hospice care in home. And this was kind of my break for the summer. And I had 1 week of camp and then 1 week of mission trip, and then I had to go back to life. And I knew that God was speaking to me very heavily at this camp, because every time that the pastor came up, it's like he was saying exactly what I needed to hear, every single time. And exactly what I had prayed about the night before, God revealed to me in that sermon, or in that afternoon service, or in like the drift in, or in the chapel. Like literally every single thing was lining up. And I brought my minister downstairs in the bottom of this beach house and was like, I feel like I'm responding to the wrong calling. He was like, well, what do you mean by that? And I was like, I feel like I'm called to youth ministry, but that scares the absolute crap out of me. Because I, at this point, was terrified of working with young people, because I didn't think it was something I would be able to do. And I didn't think that I was qualified enough. And my minister literally looked at me and was like, wow, it took you long enough. Those were his exact words. Wow, it took you long enough. And I was like, whoa, what are you talking about? He was like, honey, I've known. And why do you think I've taken you on as one of our leaders? And why do you think I'm mentoring you? Like, why do you think that I've been trying to take you under my wing so much? And it all started to make sense to me. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So he asked me if I was ready to commit to my calling and to really to pray and to release my life to God. And I was like, I'm not ready at all. I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I don't know how I'm gonna go to school. I don't know how I'm gonna come up with the money to go to divinity school. Where am I gonna go to seminary? What on earth? All these thoughts were going on in the back of my head. I was like, I'm not qualified enough to do this. I just failed out of school. Like, how is this gonna happen? So I was like, nope. He was like, okay, when you're ready, let me know. So we went into evening service, and Mike was preaching all over me during that service. He was speaking about how Paul did everything for the sake of the gospel. And this was his big sermonic moment. His big message was that we should do everything for the sake of the gospel, regardless of our fears, regardless of our inequities, regardless of how we feel about ourselves, that God will qualify us, that God can use you, He can use the broken, and that God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called. And so when it came time for altar call that night, I literally turned locked eyes with my minister, and he was like, let's go. Because I just knew. It was almost as if Mike was staring me down, and we were, just to make this even more of a God moment, we were in the very center of the auditorium that we were in, and I was sitting right in the very center, right where he had to look, okay? And it was as if he was literally looking at me. I was the only person in there, me and Mike, and he was literally saying, God is calling you to youth ministry. You have to do it because you do everything for the gospel. And he was like preaching all over me. And I was like, okay, I get it. Like, gotta do this. So I went with my minister, and we we kneeled down outside of this auditorium, and I just wept and prayed and was like, okay, God, take me, use me, mold me, I'm yours. I've got to do everything for the sake of the gospel. I can't worry about this. You're going to use me the way you're going to use me. I'm accepting my call. This is it. And it took from the age of 9 to the age of 19 for me to get there, but I got there, and now God is working everything out in the most amazing way possible. Have faith in God, y'all.
So my story is not as like complex as hers. I feel like I got called into the ministry a little bit later in life than Grace Ann did. But growing up, I always knew that I wanted to do something with music. That was basically my only true passion, was besides my faith, but music was the only thing where I could see myself having a future in. And but growing up, I don't know, I grew up in the church, and I just was like, I'm not going to be a music minister, that's just not for me. Maybe I'll be a music teacher or a performer or something. I don't think I want to be a music minister. It's just I don't think I could do it. Honestly, I felt like I wasn't spiritually stable enough to be teaching other people the gospel through music. But then I was in youth group. I think 10th grade, my youth pastor and I were talking, and I was telling him about how I didn't make all county band, and that was the biggest thing for me. I had made all county band ever since I was in 7th grade, and then my 10th grade year I didn't make, it might have been 11th grade, I don't know, it doesn't matter. But I didn't make all county band, and I felt so like stripped from all my talents. I felt like, I know I'm a good musician, but why did I not make this band? Like, I was just really doubting in my talents, and I was doubting that, did God really want me to go into music? And I was talking to my minister about it, and he actually told me the same quote. He said, God doesn't qualify the, what he said was, he doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. That's how he said it. Mm-hmm. And that quote has stuck with me ever since then. And he told me how he thinks I could maybe be into music ministry, and he could really foresee that in my future. And I was like, yeah, but no. Like, I appreciate that opinion. People have told me that before, but I'm just not going to do that.
Thanks.
Yeah. So I came to college and going into music education, and I did that for like a year and a half, I think. And there were just some people who would tell me some comments about, like, maybe you should change your major, say stuff like that. It just like caught me off guard. I was like, whoa, why do you want me to change my major? But at this, like, they didn't know that I had been thinking about changing my major, which it was just really weird for me to, I feel like that was God confirming, like, it's okay, you can change your major. So yeah, but I was thinking about changing my major because I wasn't really enjoying my music education classes. I felt like the only thing I was passionate about in those classes were music. I wasn't really passionate about education. And I just really came, it wasn't a supernatural thing. I really came to the decision that really the only things I am passionate about is music and ministry and the gospel and my faith. And why not put those together into a profession? Because that's why I'm here on this earth, is to glorify God, and I feel like He's given me the talents and the abilities to do that musically. So I was just crying and praying about what I should do, because that's a big thing, like being called in ministry, changing your whole plans.
It's very emotional.
Yeah, it's very emotional. I'm an emotional person, so it was like emotion times 8.
Oh yeah.
But and I just went back and I was thinking about that quote, God doesn't call the equipped, He equips the called. And I was like, why do I need to be worrying about all these material things like seminary and graduating on time? Like, just worry about what God has for your life. And so I decided to change my major to church ministry and church music ministry. And so that's what I'm studying right now. And just through the affirmation of other people, whenever I lead a congregation in music, I can just I don't want to sound like boastful in myself. I'm trying to boast on what the Lord has done through me, but I feel whenever I lead a congregation of people, I feel like so anointed, almost like God is allowing me to lead these people, and it's just an amazing feeling. And this summer I have been able to work at a church doing an internship, and I just can't tell you how many times I have felt so affirmed in my calling. It makes me feel like literally every single thing in my life up to this point has been forming me into this person so that I can be better for this calling and for this profession. And that is the craziest feeling. I've never felt anything like that. But this summer, working at this church has really affirmed my calling and telling me that this is where I'm supposed to be. And I just have so much peace about it. That's one thing. Whenever I changed my major, I had so much peace in all my classes. I was like, I enjoy this so much. But in my classes before, I just didn't really have peace. I wasn't really enjoying them. So that was a big sign for me, telling me that I was where I was needed to be.
I wanted to speak on that too, because when I was going through all of this, like where I am now is like so I guess I affirmed my calling like 3.5 years ago, and where I am now, like I am on the path to finish my degree, like my undergraduate degree in human services, which will set me up for my master's of divinity perfectly. And I am involved in this church plant, and I've been named the youth minister by the elders and the deacons of the church, and without me even having to tell them that I feel called to ministry. And like when my grandmother passed away, it was very peaceful for me. It wasn't a grief-stricken time. It was very like, okay, everything's gonna be okay, and I can go where I need to go. I can do what I need to do. I can make it through school. I can work and I can be successful. I can be financially stable and go to school at the same time, which was not something that was possible for me before I accepted my calling.
So now that we've shared with you our personal stories and how we were called into ministry, we wanted to talk about the importance of the support of others around you and just the different aspects of support that you really need whenever you are called into ministry, because it's hard.
Very hard.
Because people think ministry, you're not going to make any money. There's just a lot of negative when it comes to ministry, so you need some support. You definitely need support from your family. I remember whenever I called my parents the night I decided to change my major, for some reason I thought that they were going to be disappointed or mad that I was going to change my major, be like the typical college kid changing their major 8,000 times. I only changed it once. But they were so
lucky you. All right, brag about changing once. I changed my major like 4 times.
But they were so supportive. They were kind of like, I felt like they were telling me that they already knew. They were like, we totally see you in this position, so like we are so here for it. So I was just so thankful that I had those family members to support me and love me in that moment. We also need support from our friends so that they can share our burdens and that we can talk to them about the difficulties and also the high points of ministry. And it's just so important to have those people close to you that will support you through all types of ministry.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that you have friends on both sides of the coin, that you have friends that are called to the professional ministry so that you can relate with them on those things, but you also need to have friends that are not called to the professional ministry, that are only called to the global ministry, that you can talk to and be like, okay, this is the problem. Do you think this is the problem I see in church? How can we fix this? If I were to bring this up in church, how would you feel as a congregation member? Because those conversations are really important. I wanted to speak a little bit about financial support, because this is something that has been a huge burden for me in my pursuit of ministry. So as I told you, I have now been enrolled in 4 different colleges. Mississippi Community Greensboro Partner. Yeah, so I've now been enrolled in 4 different colleges, and it has been a struggle to say the least. And one of the biggest reasons that I suppressed my calling was my financial status, because I have had to, ever since I graduated from high school, I've had to work multiple jobs in order to be financially stable enough to go to college. And for some people that's not the case, and if that's not the case, that's wonderful, but for me, it was the only option. I have never had a time since I've been out of high school that I haven't had to work. And then with my disability, I haven't been able to work as much, so I was really concerned that I wasn't going to financially be able to handle going to college. But I have been incredibly blessed ever since I've given that burden to the Lord, and I've been like, okay, I'm going to pursue what you have set out for me and what you want me to do. And the financial support from my family, from my friends, and from the Lord has been in abundance. every time that I have not been able to work, God has found a way to provide for me. And I mean, and it's like little things. Like we got some money from my great-grandfather's estate, and so that gave us the money that we needed to pay for the electricity we didn't have the money for. And I got into a program that I could do online classes for, which was like $4,000 cheaper a semester, which was incredibly important for me and something that I didn't think I was going to be able to do. And when you give those things to the Lord, He will bless you in ways that only He can. And I have been out of work and then was given a job that I could do on disability, that I could work and have financial support from to be able to go back to school, which would have never been possible had I not trusted in the Lord to do that. So that financial support and the financial sort of peace, giving that to God is very important. And then another thing support-wise is you really need to have support from your home church. Now, home church support for me looks a little different than I ever thought it would, because I'm involved in a church plant now, and that is my home church. That is my base church. That is all I have now. I haven't told the entire church that I have a calling on my life, but they know, based off of how I present myself, based off of what the Lord has provided for us. And their support is everything. Like I said, the elders and the deacons of the church have just pretty much grandfathered me in as a youth minister, and that is something that almost never happens. And they are doing so because they prayed about it and they felt the Lord tell them that I was where He wanted me to be. So I think it's very important that you have that support from your home church, that you let at least some people in the congregation know, so that they can be your prayer warriors, so that they can check up on you. And another piece of that is having your chosen family, which is what I refer to as the people that are my church family, the people that I want to surround myself with, because sometimes your family doesn't quite understand exactly what you're going through, but your chosen family will, and that's very important for you to have. You need to have that support system to be there to pray for you, to support you, and to love you.
Thank you guys so much for watching this video. We hope you enjoyed it. Please put down in the comments if you've been called to ministry and what exactly it looked like for you, if you had one of those 3 subsets of types of ministry calling. And let us know if you have any questions that we can answer, because we would love to talk about our callings with you.
Oh yes. Make sure that you hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, that you click that subscribe button. It'll be right down below. It's the bright red button. Don't miss it. Click that button for us. And then right beside that subscribe button, there'll be a little bell. Ring that bell so that you get notifications every single time we post, so you don't miss a video.
Next week, exactly 1 week from today, we're coming out with our testimony video, part 1. It's going to be 2 parts. So this video kind of segues into this, because this video was more of like our calling into ministry testimony, but next week is going to be our testimony of becoming Christians and just what it was like for us. So make sure you watch out for that, and make sure you hit that bell so you won't miss it, because it will give you a notification when it is posted.
Yes. All right, guys. We'll see you next week.
Bye, friends.
Cute. How am I supposed to act peppy? I'm literally in the worst mood ever. Ow! Yeah, that's hell. We just bonk. Bonk, guys. Oh, God.
We are 2 best friends living a faith-based lifestyle and
documenting it.
If you haven't already,
hey, macaroni. And documenting it. No, and documenting it. Oh, God.
we are 2 best friends living a faith-based lifestyle
And documenting it.
and documenting.
Documenting it.
And we are 2 best friends living a faith-based lifestyle and
documenting it. Not anymore!
we're not best friends anymore because of that car. I'll just do it with you like this. Hey friends, we are Grace and Andrea, and forToday. We are 2 best friends living a faith-based lifestyle and documenting it. If you have not already followed, I'll show me it.
Show me it. I'm gonna simultaneously throw up and sob everywhere at the same time.